With September being Suicide Prevention Month, I wanted to talk about my own experience with depression and my own desire to expire, as I have come to call it, and the why behind that, the reasons why I felt the way that I did or thought the way that I did during those times, and the things that, as an undiagnosed autistic person, contributed to those feelings throughout my life. I wasn't diagnosed until my 40s, so I had a lot of experience that things that I experienced that I didn't have a good explanation for, and a lot of time with no accommodations whatsoever. Being late diagnosed definitely played a role in some of that. But I'm not a mental health expert, so just disclaimer, this isn't meant to be any kind of advice. And I just wanted to share my experience, because the more people share their experience, the more we can learn from that. And possibly, the more stories that we have that can possibly prevent some of this from happening to other people. And I've known several people in my life that have chosen to opt out of life altogether. And they all come from different backgrounds. They had different experiences. So the more people share their stories, I think the better chance we have of preventing that from happening. So one of the biggest contributors to my thoughts on the desire to expire, one of the biggest contributors was masking or camouflaging, I guess. Is now I'm learning about camouflaging, and I'm kind of confused about which one I'm more guilty of. I think camouflaging is, at this point in my life, is more what I do. But when I was trying to behave in a way that neurotypicals behave and participate in the activities that neurotypicals have no problem participating in, and fulfill these roles and expectations that people have of holistics. And I was failing miserably at doing all of those things, because mainly sensory issues with so many things. And, I have social problems, communication problems, all of it. And it was all causing me just so many difficulties throughout my life. But, in my 20s is when the ideation really started. And I just didn't see what I could do to make things easier on myself. And I found myself in a lot of situations in which I felt very overwhelmed and trapped and miserable. And it seemed like the harder I tried to, play these roles that I was supposed to just naturally fit into, if I had been a neurotypical female, I might have fallen into place a little better, but I just was not fitting in. And so, trying to fit in sometimes in my 20s would involve alcohol or, anything that I thought could help me be more social, and tolerate being in an environment that was just way too overstimulating for me, because I always noticed, like, all these people seem to be having a good time, and it's so loud and bright and smelly in here to me, and my clothes are so uncomfortable, and I'm just very aware of every sensation. And so maybe they're all having a good time because they're all doing something like drinking or whatever that makes it more tolerable for them. But none of that stuff ever was good for me physically. I'm very sensitive to all sorts of things. I was always just really sensitive to different things, and it wasn't necessarily an allergy, but alcohol would just hit me super hard. And any kind of, even over the counter medications and stuff, I had to be really careful with because they just had like a strong effect. So where some people were self-medicating with things recreationally, I just couldn't. It made me feel so much worse. And like trying to do that for, I think there was like a year and a half where I tried that repeatedly. That was probably one of the most miserable year and a half, one of the most miserable years and a half, I don't know how to say that I've ever lived. And it just made me feel physically terrible on top of everything else, which was what also being in sensory overwhelm, overstimulating environments would also make me feel physically terrible. So being in these environments around people that I really had no business being around, and trying these things that had a negative effect on my physical health, that were really bad for my body and my neurology, that just led me to feel like there was no escape. And I just didn't really know what else to do. And so I thought about it. I always just overthink everything, I guess in that case, luckily. But I couldn't see myself really finishing the job, I guess is how you say it. I didn't think that I just had it in me to finish the job myself. So that's kind of why I came up with the term desire to expire, and if that's not original, I'm sorry, we just must have tapped into the same collective unconscious. But because it was more of a wish, just wishing that something would happen to me that would, take that responsibility out of my hands and just end me. But that was mostly during my 20s when I experienced the thoughts where I was really deeply considering ways in which to do that, carry that out myself. And it mostly had to do with me getting myself into situations that were bad for me, and whether that involved alcohol or any substances, or just being too social, or being in a work environment that was toxic, or a relationship that was toxic. All of those things happened to me, up until oh my gosh. Well, individually, those things happened to me, through current day, but during my 20s, it seemed like those things were simultaneously happening to me all at once. And it was so overwhelming, and just trying to find my place in life and where I fit in. And it seemed like I fit in absolutely nowhere. I wasn't like this enough for that group or that enough for this group, and social communication issues out the wazoo. So, finding myself misunderstood by nearly everyone that I communicated with. And it was so totally frustrating and disheartening. And, trying to just blend in. Like, sometimes I would get attention and it would be unwanted attention, and it would turn out to be, positive attention that turned out to have a negative result. And so I had to find a balance where I'm getting, just enough social activity to appear normal, and not too much, because I didn't want too much attention. And it was just too much. It was too much for me. And, sometimes young ladies can get attention that, especially if they feel misunderstood and are feeling really down, and may easily be taken advantage of. So then that can put you in, a whole different world of trouble on top of everything else. So you have to always be on the lookout for that. And also, I didn't feel comfortable with the roles that were, the labels that were put on me. And, I had so many different interests that were just, as I got older, people were like getting married and having families and babies. And, it was just like, I felt like more of an outsider the older I got. And I'm still, interested in things that I, like Tolkien. I was reading The Hobbit in junior high school, and that was still a huge interest of mine, and people are just moving right on past me. And I thought, is it that I'm not a parent, that I just don't feel like an adult, or what? And I just think that there's some critical piece of information that I'm missing here, or life experience that I'm missing here. And I just couldn't figure out what it was, but I just kept feeling more isolated and more different and misunderstood. And all of that, and being very unsuccessful in relationships, because people would get excited about me really quickly, it seemed like, and just place all of these expectations on me, and they would project onto me their dream person. And when I failed to meet their expectations, it was just like crash and burn. And I'm guilty of that too. Guilty of having these expectations of like, this is going to be the person that gets me, or they're going to be the one that understands, and we're going to have adventures because we just get each other. And, whenever you don't know that you're autistic, there's a huge piece of information missing. And that would have probably been helpful in a lot of my relationships to have known that, at least to have shared that bit of information right out the gate. But it's the failure of relationships, and thinking that it was on me, that I just somehow was defective, and that I just couldn't connect with humanity. Like, I never had any trouble connecting with animals, and the natural world, I always felt a strong connection there. And humanity was a little different. Occasionally, like, I have a handful of friends. I guess I have 3 friends that I have managed to keep friendships with long term, and so we understood each other. But in general, I don't just really connect with the average person, and it seems like average people are who I run into on the average. I guess that if I was not, if I was gifted at math, if I was one of the math stats autistics, I might know a little about that. But I would think that, statistics would show that average people are the ones you meet on average, hence average. So I'm not average, and I don't mean that in an I'm special kind of way. I mean, I just have neurological wiring that everyone doesn't have. I don't fit in, and that used to give me a lot more problems than it currently does. And but once I did kind of discover that being out in nature and connecting with nature and animals, and that's where it's at for me, where I find my peace of mind, it helped a lot. But it didn't help whenever I was experiencing real bad burnout for the first time a couple of years ago. And I didn't know that it was burnout, but that's what led me ultimately to my autism diagnosis. And during that time, the desire to expire was really strong, really, really strong, because in all the times before that I had experienced depression, I had 2 dogs. And my 2 dogs were the loves of my life. And so anytime I got really seriously contemplating doing anything to remove myself from this planet or the universe, consciously speaking, I would think about my dogs and what would happen to them, how they would feel about that, and all of, they were my reason for hanging on. They were my reason for sticking around for so long. And so I didn't have my dogs anymore at the point where I experienced really bad burnout, when I actually realized that it was something more than just depression. And so I felt this overwhelming grief, and I realized when I was describing the depression I was having to someone, I realized that it was overwhelming grief because I told them I feel like my dog just died. That the last one had passed away a year and a half before. And I just had, like, the grief had just caught up to me. And, I think there are a lot of reasons for that, but processing is a huge thing for me. Like, I don't process anything quickly. And, I process information first and then emotions second, typically. And since my dog had gone missing, he was 17 when he went missing. So I figured, out here in the woods, the answers were there. I just didn't have a physical way to say goodbye and grieve in the same way that I did with my basset hound. So the grief was like prolonged or something like that. And since I didn't have closure. So when I'm experiencing that grief, I had also, I'd had a lot of things happen, during like the last several years. And I had a trip to Norway that I was like, if I just need to not think about that until after I'm done with my trip. I don't want to be like in the middle of depression when I'm going on this trip. And so I would really just put off processing a lot of things and put off thinking about them and addressing things. And so I went on the trip, and it was physically really hard on me. It was an enjoyable trip, but physically so hard on me because I have Raynaud's, and being undiagnosed autistic at the time, I'm constantly in the presence of other people. I went on a trip with my best friend and her daughter, and I was like no alone time, and you can only spend so much time in the bathroom before somebody comes looking for you. And it was just like all of these things, the sleep cycle too, because the time zone difference, it was physically really hard on me. And so when I got back, I had all of these physical problems that like the Raynaud's was really, really bad once I got back and during that trip. And I went to my doctor, and we talk about all the different things, and he's like, that was a very stressful event for you. And how are other things in your life? And we started talking, and eventually I got back on Wellbutrin, which I had been on in my 20s. That was what finally helped me kick a few bad habits, and helped with a depressive episode back then. And so he got me back on that. But before that, before that trip, I had just kind of had this this mental block, like everything is behind this wall. And when I got back, the wall was just breached completely. Everything just came crashing down on me, and I was just feeling all of these things all at once. And the one thing that I had to look forward to had happened, so there was nothing on the horizon for me to look forward for me to look forward to. And so I just was laying in bed as long as I could in the morning, staring at my ceiling, walking across, like through the crosswalk without looking. As long as the signal was showing I'm good, I would step out in the street, and, just being really careless with my safety, because I just wanted something to happen. Just wished that something would happen and just take me out and end my misery. And so, and also I was really overwhelmed by sensory input at that point. I had not figured out all the accommodations that I need, and still hadn't figured out that I'm autistic. So I was just experiencing the world with no filter, and it was overwhelming to me. It had gotten amplified. It was like all of my senses were just amplified completely after taking the break when I was working at home during COVID. Going back out into the world was so overwhelming, and everything had gotten so much worse. I was thriving while I was at home, but going back out into the world, I had just dropped all of the mask and everything altogether. So it was really overwhelming for me to go back into working in the city and being surrounded by all of these people and all these sounds. And it was just so much. And that was making me get overstimulated and leading to sensory overload so frequently and I was having migraines like so incredibly frequently, that it was all just so much that I wanted it to end. But, that um, kind of led me to the diagnosis. And now that I have that, I know how to accommodate myself, and I'm still learning because, even things that I could tolerate before, they weren't exactly comfortable, but I could tolerate them. Now, some things I can't even tolerate. And, like certain fabrics, it's um, just something that I'm going to have to make adjustments in order to make my life comfortable for me to live. And I think that was such a huge contributor to me wanting, having the desire to expire, was just not being comfortable in my life, just my life being this. I realize that life has discomfort that goes along with it, but like physical pain is what I'm talking about. Like there were so many things that caused me physical pain on a daily basis that people are just like totally fine with, and some things that people even enjoy that I find intolerable, like really soft touches, or overhead lights, or things like that. So, not having any accommodations, it just made life really painful for me. And then, that was physically painful. And then having other pain on top of that, the mental anguish that comes with not being able to connect with people, and still, like, I realize that some people have given up, that I don't have a desire to connect, but I still had a desire to connect occasionally. I didn't want to just be completely isolated. I'm Although sometimes that whole desert island scenario, or castaway, that looks like the ideal situation. Sometimes I know that I would miss occasionally talking to people and connecting. The feelings of isolation that I felt, where I just couldn't connect. No matter how many people I talked to in a room full of people, I would still be alone, still be totally alone. And that feeling was what really led me to want to just opt out of it. But removing myself from environments that were unhealthy for me was the biggest help, probably. Yeah, there were different things that I realized that that helped alleviate those feelings, and I already put a lot of that in other videos, so I won't regurgitate all of that info. But learning to laugh about things also, it was a huge thing for me, because when I was a kid, I was like that little girl on One Piece that ate the smile fruit. I was constantly laughing. A lot of it was nervous laughter, and like, just like that little girl, like I couldn't express emotions anyway but laughing. Sometimes, probably because I wasn't allowed to do anything else. But so I laughed so much as a kid, and I think that early on, humor became kind of a coping mechanism for me, and it's a lot healthier coping mechanism than some of the alternatives. But once I was a teenager, that laughter kind of died, and it didn't really come back until later, much later in my life. And I kind of since my diagnosis, feel like I graduated from nihilism to absurdism. And it's kind of a healthier philosophy for me to just think about things and not take the world so seriously, because, before I was taking things so seriously, like just wanting to, I guess, caring about other people's expectations of me. And I, I don't know if you would call me a people pleaser before, but I did care about their expectations and whether or not they were met. But, you know, coming to prioritize myself has been, essential in not feeling like I want to just become part of the universe again in a different form. And so I just try to laugh at things. And when things get too serious, it doesn't matter to me if somebody thinks it's distasteful, if I'm, making light of a situation. If it's getting too overwhelming for me and I can find some sort of humor in it, I will. I absolutely will. And so, and I think that's helped me, deal with a lot of things. And so I'll just continue to do that. I'm not saying that's the healthiest way to deal with things, but I just have to do whatever works in the moment to get myself, just to keep myself staying afloat. So anyway, I guess that's pretty much all I have to say on that.